I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you are standing inside this vast ancient museum.
Okay, I can picture that.
And as you walk through this museum, you start to notice something, well, deeply unsettling, or maybe wondrous, depending on how you look at it.
Right, right.
In the center of every single room, regardless of the era, regardless of the culture that produced the art, a single face keeps appearing.
Like a recurring motif.
Exactly. In the first few galleries, it's faint. Sometimes it's just like a pencil sketch of a shepherd, or maybe a shadow cast against a wall by a temple fire, or, a silhouette of a king on a throne.
Just hints of it.
Right. But you keep walking, room after room, century after century, and the lines get sharper. And finally, you step into the last massive gallery, and the portrait is revealed in full, blinding, multi-dimensional color.
Oh, wow. That's a powerful image.
The New Testament is that final gallery. And that faith, the one that the entire architectural structure of the museum was built to showcase, is Jesus Christ. Welcome to today's deep dive, by the way. I'm so glad you are joining us for this.
It really is a compelling analogy because, it captures the architectural intentionality of the text.
Yeah, it wasn't just random.
Not at all. I mean, the Old Testament asked these agonizing questions and sketched the outlines in blood and smoke, basically. But the New Testament provides the finished portrait. And that portrait is, well, it's overwhelmingly complex.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are taking a really comprehensive look at how the entire New Testament, specifically looking beyond just the four Gospels, how it harmonizes to present Jesus.
Right, not just as a static, two-dimensional historical figure pinned to a Roman cross.
Exactly. But as a living cosmic reality. We're going to explore his ongoing ministry as the high priest, the sacrificial lamb, the king, the servant, the ultimate man, and God incarnate.
And we have a massive stack of theological texts, biblical commentary, and historical analysis to distill today. We're going to try to give you an impartial look at all of it.
Yeah, we have a lot of ground to cover. And, we have sources that represent different theological traditions, so we're just reporting on the concepts here, not taking sides.
Right, exactly. And we have to start by throwing out the instinct to simplify. Because human nature wants to put a historical figure into a single, easily definable box.
Oh, for sure. Like a philosopher.
Or a revolutionary.
A martyr, even. But to understand the New Testament text, you have to hold multiple, seemingly contradictory truths in your hands at the exact same time.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to even begin to understand the epistles, we really have to start with the foundational paradox of the entire Christian narrative.
Core tension. Right. The core tension. How can one person be both the one making the offering and the offering itself? I mean, without understanding this dynamic of the priest and the sacrificial lamb, reading the rest of the New Testament is, well, it's like trying to read a legal contract in a language you don't speak.
That's a great way to put it, because to grasp the sheer shock value of that paradox, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the ancient world.
Which was completely different from ours.
Oh, entirely. In every other ancient religion, literally without exception, a priest brings a sacrifice to appease a volatile deity.
Right, whether it's the Greeks, the Romans, the Canaanites.
Or even the Old Testament Levitical system itself. The priest is always the mediator, and the animal or the grain is the payment.
You are essentially like bribing the divine to look the other way, or to bless your crops or whatever.
Exactly. The priest and the sacrifice are distinctly, fundamentally separate entities in the ancient mind.
Right. The priest goes home to his family, and the animal gets burned to ash.
Yes. But in the Christian narrative, God steps into the physical world and becomes both the priest and the sacrifice.
Fulfilling two completely different strands of Old Testament prophecy simultaneously. Which is mind-blowing.
It really is.
I mean, as the lamb, Jesus fulfills the Passover from Exodus 12. Think about the sensory reality of that original Passover in Egypt for a second.
Oh, the smell of hyssop.
Yeah, the hyssop, the visceral smearing of blood on the wooden doorposts of the house so the angel of death would pass over. It was intensely physical.
And he also fulfills the prophecy of the suffering servant in Isaiah 53, the one who is led like a lamb to the slaughter, bearing the sins of many.
Right. His blood is substitutionary, it's final, and crucially, it's voluntary.
But then, simultaneously, as a high priest, he fulfills Psalm 110, which speaks of an eternal priesthood in the mysterious order of Melchizedek.
And he fulfills the Day of Atonement from Leviticus 16, where the high priest enters the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctum of the temple, to make intercession for the entire nation. But wait, I need to challenge the mechanics of this, though. Let's look at the actual chronological sequence of Levitical law.
Okay, let's do it.
Under the Old Testament system, the priest slaughters the animal, catches the blood in a basin, and then physically carries that blood into the Holy of Holies to present it to God.
Right. The presentation is key.
So the priest has to be alive to officiate the ceremony. If Jesus is the one on the altar bleeding out and dying as the lamb, how is he simultaneously the priest officiating?
That's the logical hang-up, right?
Yeah, I mean, the timeline just falls apart. Who is doing the presenting if the priest is dead?
This raises an incredibly important question, and it's one the early church wrestled with deeply. To understand how these overlap, we actually have to use a legal framework.
Okay, a legal framework. How so?
Well, imagine a courtroom where absolute, uncompromising justice is the standard, and you, the listener, you are the defendant, and you stand guilty of a capital offense.
Okay, so I'm in deep trouble.
The evidence is overwhelming. The judge, who represents the absolute holiness of God, must pass the sentence. The law demands it. Otherwise, the judge is corrupt.
Right, a good judge can't just let a murderer walk free and say, don't worry about it.
Exactly. A just judge has to punish the crime. So the death sentence is pronounced. But then the judge does something legally unthinkable.
What does he do?
He steps down from the bench. He takes off his judicial robe. He walks down and stands in the dock with you.
Oh, wow.
And he takes the death sentence upon himself. That is the historical work of the Lamb on the cross. The penalty is violently absorbed.
But the story obviously doesn't end on Friday.
Right. On Sunday, he doesn't just come back to life. He stands back up, puts on the garments of a legal advocate, and legally represents you, the defendant, for the rest of time.
That's a wild shift.
He presents the evidence of his own paid penalty to satisfy the court's demands. That is the ongoing work of the priest.
So the cross was the altar of the sacrifice, but his resurrected life is the priesthood presenting that sacrifice eternally.
You nailed it.
That reframes it completely. Yeah. I mean, he is the defense attorney who physically paid the fine out of his own lifeblood, and now he just stands in the courtroom holding up the receipt.
Yes, holding up the receipt. I love that.
To really visualize how visceral this was, we need to walk through the layout of the ancient Jewish tabernacle, but looking at it with New Testament eyes.
Oh, absolutely. The architecture is a theology lesson in itself.
Let's walk you through this. Imagine you are an ancient Israelite. You bring your animal, and you enter the outer courtyard. The very first thing you encounter is the brazen altar.
And it is massive.
Massive. It's made of bronze. It smells like burning flesh and smoke.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where the animal sacrifices were literally burnt.
It represents substitutionary justice. It's where the penalty of sin is violently absorbed.
Right. And the cross is the ultimate reality that the brazen altar was merely pointing toward. The cross is the altar where justice falls, but it falls on the Creator instead of the creation.
Which is why, when John the Baptist sees Jesus walking toward him in the Gospel of John, he points at him and yells, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world."
Right. He didn't just say, "Behold a good teacher."
Exactly. To a first-century Jewish ear, John is instantly connecting this walking, talking rabbi to the blood and fire of that brazen altar.
But the priest's journey doesn't stop at the altar. If you keep walking toward the inner tent, the holy place, the next object blocking your path is the bronze laver.
A wash basin.
Yeah, this was a massive basin of water, actually made from the melted down bronze mirrors of the women of Israel, which is a cool historical detail.
Very cool.
The priests had to wash their hands and feet in this basin before they could enter the presence of God. It was a symbol of purification. You can't just have your penalty paid, you have to be cleansed before you can approach the divine.
Which Paul brilliantly maps onto the Christian experience. In his letter to Titus, chapter 3, verse 5, Paul writes about the washing of regeneration and renewal of the Holy Spirit.
Oh, right, the washing of regeneration.
Yeah. Yes. Jesus didn't just forgive the legal penalty at the altar of the cross. He actually cleanses the human nature at the laver of the Spirit.
And think about what this means psychologically for someone living today. What does it actually do to a human brain to believe that their ultimate defense attorney is also the one who already paid their ultimate penalty?
It has to completely rewire you.
It does. Because human beings are wired for performance. I mean, we are constantly trying to balance our internal scales, trying to be, good enough to earn love or success or divine favor.
Constantly striving.
But this completely removes the anxiety of performance-based religion. You aren't constantly wondering if you've brought a good enough sacrifice, because the priest brought himself.
And this psychological freedom is the exact bedrock of New Testament theology. You can't perform your way into the courtroom's good graces because the trial is over, the verdict is in, and the fine is paid.
Period.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to fully grasp how this salvation alters the human experience, we really have to look at who Jesus is in his very nature.
Right, moving beyond just what he did.
Right. We've talked about the mechanics of how he saved humanity as priest and lamb. Now we need to look at the 4 distinct lenses the text uses to describe his identity: king, servant, ultimate man, and God.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I've heard people compare the 4 Gospels to a diamond, where you turn it and see different facets.
That's a classic analogy.
It is, but honestly, I think a better analogy is trying to understand a hyperdimensional object passing through our 3-dimensional space.
Oh, like a 4D object.
Yeah, if a 4D object passes through our 3D world, depending on the angle of intersection, it might look like a sphere or a cube or a cone to us.
Because our brains can't process the whole thing at once?
Exactly. The Gospels are giving us 4 different 3D cross-sections of reality that is just too massive to capture in one portrait. Matthew shows us the cross-section of the king. Mark shows us the servant. Luke shows us the ultimate man. And John shows us God incarnate.
That hyperdimensional analogy is incredibly helpful because honestly, these 4 identities seem contradictory at first glance. I mean, if you look at Matthew, Jesus is presented relentlessly as the king. Matthew is writing primarily to a Jewish audience, so he traces Jesus' lineage all the way back to King David.
Establishing those royal credentials right away.
Right. He is showing that Jesus fulfills the Davidic covenant from 2 Samuel 7, where God promised David that his descendant would sit on an eternal throne.
But here's the friction. Jesus' kingdom doesn't operate like Rome. And it doesn't even operate like the ancient Israelite monarchy.
No, it doesn't.
It operates through sacrificial love, not coercion, taxation, or, military might.
Which bleeds perfectly into Mark's cross-section, the servant. Mark was likely writing to a Roman audience, right? A culture obsessed with power, dominance, and conquest.
And what does Mark highlight?
The paradox of ultimate authority washing the dirt off his followers' feet.
It's completely subversive.
Mark 10.45 is really the thesis statement. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. He subverts the entire Roman concept of what power actually is.
And then Luke, who is a physician and a Gentile, gives us the ultimate man, or what Paul later unpacks as the second Adam.
And the theological premise here is staggering.
It really is. The first Adam was given dominion over the earth, but failed, bringing corruption and death into the human lineage.
Right.
Jesus is presented by Luke as the prototype of a new, perfected humanity. He succeeds where the first Adam failed. He goes into the wilderness, faces the exact same core temptations of appetite, pride, and power, and resists them, living in perfect dependence on God.
He is what humanity was supposed to be before the malware was installed, to use a modern phrase.
I love that, the original uninterrupted code.
Exactly. And finally, John's cross-section doesn't start with a human genealogy in Bethlehem like the others. He starts in the uncreated cosmos.
In the beginning was the Word.
Right. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John uses the Greek philosophical concept of the logos, the divine reason or ordering principle of the universe.
And he basically drops a bomb on Greek philosophy.
He does. By saying the logos became flesh and pitched his tent among us. Jesus isn't just a really good representative of God. He is the fullness of the Godhead clothed in a human body.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that these identities are intimately, necessarily reliant on one another.
You can't separate them.
The roaring power of the Lion the King is only legally accessible through the shed blood of the Lamb. True kingship in the New Testament is defined entirely by the willingness to be a servant.
Right, you cannot separate the God who orchestrates the collision of galaxies from the man who stood at the tomb of his friend Lazarus and wept.
So we have these 6 identities: priest, lamb, king, servant, man, God. But they don't just freeze in amber when Jesus ascends into the clouds at the end of the Gospels.
They don't become a relic in our museum.
No, they activate on a cosmic scale. When we move chronologically from the Gospels into the book of Acts, we are answering the fundamental question of the early church, which is, what is Jesus doing right now?
Because the ascension is often misunderstood as a departure.
Right. People think he just left.
But it wasn't a departure, it was a promotion. The headquarters just shifted.
Yeah. Luke wrote both the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And in Acts chapter 1, verse 1, he uses a very specific, deliberate phrase.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
He says to Theophilus that his first book, the Gospel, was about all that Jesus began to do and teach.
The word began is doing so much heavy lifting there.
The absolute implication is that the book of Acts, this chaotic history of shipwrecks, riots, and church planting, is a record of what Jesus continues to do.
The physical body of Jesus may have left the immediate earthly atmosphere, but his agency absolutely has not. In Acts, we see him immediately active, but now he is operating through his Spirit.
Right.
He is the Spirit baptizer. In Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, he pours out the Holy Spirit upon the disciples, fulfilling the ancient prophecy of Joel chapter 2. He is the one actively empowering his followers with languages of fire.
And he is still the active healer. I love Acts 3. Peter and John are walking to the temple, and there's a man who has been paralyzed from birth, begging at the gate.
It's a great scene.
Peter looks at him and says, "I don't have silver and gold, but what I do have I give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk."
Peter and John don't claim to have magic powers themselves.
Exactly. They don't take the credit at all. The healing happens through them by the direct authority and power of Jesus. Jesus is doing the healing. He's just using Peter's vocal cords to announce it.
We also see Jesus as the righteous judge later in Acts, but perhaps the most jarring, paradigm-shifting moment of Jesus actively interceding from heaven is in chapter 9, the Damascus Road encounter.
Oh, this is the turning point of the entire New Testament.
Without a doubt.
Saul of Tarsus, who later becomes the Apostle Paul, is basically a religious terrorist. He is hunting down Christians, arresting them, voting for their executions. He's on his way to Damascus with literal arrest warrants.
He's on a mission.
Suddenly, a light brighter than the midday sun knocks him to the ground, and a voice says, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?"
It's the me that changes everything.
Exactly. Wait, I want to zero in on that.
If
Jesus is physically, bodily in heaven, exalted at the right hand of the Father, why does he take this so personally?
Why does he say Saul is persecuting him?
Right. He doesn't say, "Why are you hurting my followers?" Or, "Why are you attacking my theological movement?"
Because the movement isn't just a philosophy. It is an organism. This is one of the most profound theological shifts in human history. It reveals the absolute, unbroken, mystical solidarity between the head Jesus and the body, the church.
That connection is so deep.
To strike the church is to physically strike Christ. Jesus is no longer localized in one physical body walking around the dusty roads of Galilee. He is now distributed through millions of believers globally. His identity is intrinsically, permanently wrapped up in his people.
Think of it like a military command structure. Imagine a brilliant 5-star general. He has been down in the muddy trenches with the infantry, bleeding with them, fighting hand-to-hand combat.
Okay, I'm checking.
But the decisive, war-winning battle is fought and won, so he moves from the trenches up to the high-tech command center overlooking the entire continent. He hasn't left the war. He has just changed his vantage point.
Right.
Now, when he speaks an order into his radio, it changes the front lines instantly. But more than that, because of his deep solidarity with his troops, when a soldier in the field takes ground, it is the general taking ground. And when a soldier is hit by enemy fire, the general feels the loss on the tactical map as an attack on his own command.
It is delegated, cosmic authority. And think about how that empowers a modern believer reading Acts today.
It changes everything.
When you read Acts, you realize that when believers act in alignment with the Spirit, they aren't trying to do nice things for a distant historical Jesus. Jesus is actively doing things through them. They are the physical hands and feet of a cosmic entity.
Which takes us right into the architecture of the Pauline epistles. Because if the book of Acts is the action movie showing us the history of this cosmic Christ, Paul's letters give us the theological blueprints explaining how the physics of this new reality actually work.
Paul does a lot of the heavy lifting theologically.
He does. Let's group Paul's letters not by chronology but by theme. Let's look at the first major theme, the architecture of grace, or how God rewrites the human code. This covers Romans, Galatians, and 1 and 2 Corinthians.
Paul writes a huge chunk of the New Testament, and while he is constantly addressing hyper-specific local church drama...
Oh yeah, people suing each other, weird dietary disputes, moral failure...
Right, all of that. But underneath every single letter is a singular, massive Christology. In Romans, he tackles the deepest philosophical problem of humanity. How can a perfectly just God declare guilty people innocent without compromising his own justice?
And his answer is Jesus is the second Adam. In Romans 5, Paul lays out this incredible framework. Let's go back to our modern analogy.
The operating system.
Yeah. Think of the first Adam as the original operating system for humanity. When Adam rebelled, a catastrophic virus sin was introduced into the source code. Because we are all downloaded from that original source code, every single human being boots up with this corrupted operating system.
We are infected by nature.
Exactly. The system is fundamentally broken. It can't be fixed with a minor software update or a list of rules.
Right. You can't just slap the 10 Commandments on a corrupted hard drive and expect it to run smoothly.
So Jesus, the second Adam, steps in as the ultimate patch. But he doesn't just patch the old system. He is a brand new, flawless operating system. And when a person places their faith in him, he literally rewrites their spiritual code.
They're transferred from the crash network of the first Adam onto the perfect network of the second Adam.
Yes.
And Paul explains exactly the legal mechanism of how that transfer was secured in Romans 3.25. He uses a highly specific, provocative Greek word, hilasterion.
Hilasterion. Oh.
English Bibles usually translate this as propitiation or sacrifice of atonement. But to a first-century Jew, hilasterion was a physical object. It was the Greek word for the mercy seat.
Wait, the solid gold lid on top of the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes. Think about the Ark of the Covenant inside the Holy of Holies. Inside the wooden box are the tablets of the 10 Commandments, which is the absolute law of God, which humanity has broken.
Okay, the broken law is inside the box.
Above the box are the golden cherubim, representing the terrifying holy presence of God looking down. Between the holy gaze of God and the broken law of humanity is the golden lid, the mercy seat, the hilasterion. Once a year, the high priest would take the blood of the sacrifice and sprinkle it on that gold lid.
So when God looks down, he doesn't see the broken law. He sees the blood that satisfied the penalty of the broken law.
And Paul is looking at his readers and saying, Jesus is the hilasterion. Jesus is the physical location in the cosmos where a holy God meets a sinful humanity, not with wrath, but with mercy, because the justice has been completely satisfied by his own blood.
That solves the philosophical problem entirely.
It does. God isn't a corrupt judge sweeping sin under the rug. Justice is executed, the penalty is violently fully paid, and therefore mercy can flow freely and legally.
It's breathtaking. And then Paul takes this concept of the crucified Jesus and uses it to dismantle intellectual arrogance in 1 Corinthians.
Because Corinth was, well, it was something else.
It was this wealthy, cosmopolitan Greek city obsessed with status, rhetoric, and philosophy. And Paul writes to them and presents Jesus as crucified wisdom. He says the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing.
Which, to a Greek philosopher, a God who gets executed by the state, is a loser. It's an absurdity.
And to a Jewish scholar looking for a conquering military messiah, a crucified rabbi is a stumbling block.
But Paul says this apparent weakness is actually the ultimate power of God.
He reinforces that in 2 Corinthians, presenting Jesus as the sustainer in our weakness. Paul talks about carrying the immense glory of the gospel in jars of clay, our fragile, aging, breaking human bodies.
It's such a comforting image, really.
It is. He writes the famous words in 2 Corinthians 5.21, that God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. It's the great exchange.
And if Romans is the theological textbook of this exchange, Galatians is the emotional battle cry.
Paul was fired up in Galatians.
Oh, he was furious. Galatians presents Jesus as the liberator. Paul is so angry because false teachers are trying to drag believers back into the Jewish law, back into circumcision and rule-keeping.
And Paul says Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us on the tree, Galatians 3.13.
Right. He took the toxic, lethal injection of the curse into his own veins so he could walk out of the prison cell. To go back to rule-keeping is to voluntarily walk back into maximum security after you've been given a full pardon.
Why would anyone do that?
Exactly. But Paul doesn't stop at individual pardons. As we move into the second major theme of his letters, which we find in Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and the Thessalonian letters, Paul zooms the camera way out.
He moves from the individual soul to the cosmic scale.
Jesus isn't just saving you from your sins. He is the cosmic reversal of power. He is ruling the universe and intimately unifying his church.
Ephesians is where my mind just gets blown. Jesus is presented as the head of the body, but also the peacemaker who destroys the dividing wall of hostility.
A literal wall.
Yeah, in the ancient temple, there was a literal stone wall separating the court of the Gentiles from the inner courts where the Jews could worship. There were signs on it saying that any foreigner who crossed it would have themselves to blame for their ensuing death.
Talk about hostility.
Right. And Paul says Jesus took that wall and the racial, cultural, and religious animosity it represented and smashed it to powder. He takes two warring factions and creates one new, unified humanity in himself.
And how did he achieve that cosmic victory? Paul answers that in Philippians chapter 2 in what is arguably the most analyzed passage in all of Paul's writings.
The kenosis.
The kenosis, the emptying. Paul writes that Jesus, who existed in the morphe, the essential, unchangeable nature and form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or exploited for his own advantage.
Instead, he emptied himself.
Right, taking the morphe of a servant, or more accurately, a doulos, a slave.
So what does this all mean? Let's get into the theology of the kenosis. Because the immediate assumption people make is, oh, he poured out his divinity. He stopped being God to become human.
Which is a huge misunderstanding.
Like, if a cup is full of water and you empty it, the water is gone. Did Jesus subtract his divinity?
You cannot subtract divinity from the divine. If God ceases to be God for even a millisecond, the universe unravels.
Right. The atoms would just fall apart.
Exactly. The texts and historical orthodoxy are very clear. Jesus did not empty himself of his deity. What he emptied himself of was the independent exercise of his divine privileges, his prerogatives, and his visible blinding glory.
He voluntarily veiled his glory in human flesh and submitted his human will entirely to the Father.
Yes. He didn't stop being the king. He just took off the crown, left the palace, and put on the dirt-stained uniform of a peasant.
That is profound.
And we have to read this through the lens of the culture Paul was writing to. The Roman Empire was a hyper-stratified, status-obsessed social pyramid.
Oh, totally. Your entire worth was based on who was beneath you.
The emperor is at the top. The doulos, the slave with zero rights, is at the absolute bottom. For Paul to claim that the supreme creator of the cosmos voluntarily descended the pyramid to take the morph of a slave was a scandalous, offensive social reversal.
It completely upended their understanding of power. Roman power is dominating others. Jesus' power is the infinite capacity to lay his life down to serve others.
Which makes the claims he makes next in Colossians sound almost like political treason.
Oh, absolutely. In Colossians 1, Paul calls Jesus the icon, the image of the invisible God. He says that by him all things were created, visible and invisible, thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities, and in him all things hold together.
He is the preeminent creator.
He is the gravitational force holding the atomic structure of the universe together.
And the choice of the word icon is a direct shot across the bow of Roman imperial propaganda.
How so?
Well, if you lived in a dusty province in Asia Minor, hundreds of miles from Rome, you would probably never see the emperor in person.
Sure. No TV or internet back then.
But you felt his authority, his presence, and his power through his icon. His image stamped on the denarius coin you used to buy bread, or the marble statue in the center of your city.
The emperor's icon demanded your allegiance.
Paul is saying, no, Jesus isn't a vague philosophical shadow. He is the exact, tangible, authoritative manifestation of the invisible God in the universe.
If you want to know what God looks like, you don't look at Caesar, you look at the crucified and risen Christ.
Right. And we see the practical application of this cosmic supremacy in a tiny one-chapter letter. Paul writes, Philemon.
Oh, I love Philemon.
It's a letter about a runaway slave named Onesimus who became a Christian, and Paul is sending him back to his Christian master, Philemon. But Paul uses the reality of who Jesus is to completely subvert the institution of Roman slavery from the inside out.
He tells Philemon to receive Onesimus no longer as a slave, but as a beloved brother.
Jesus is the unseen reconciler of broken, hierarchical social relationships. If Jesus is the master of both of them, and if Jesus took the form of a slave, then human slavery is fundamentally incompatible with the kingdom.
Paul provides the church with this massive theological and social architecture. But as we transition into the book of Hebrews, the camera angle shifts dramatically.
It really does. Hebrews zooms us away from the local church disputes in Corinth or Colossae and takes us straight up into the unseen heavenly realms.
It shows us the actual ongoing mechanics of what Jesus is doing right now as our high priest.
Hebrews is the grand synthesis of everything we've talked about.
Oh.
The author, whose identity we still don't definitively know, by the way, is writing to a community of Jewish believers who are exhausted.
They are facing persecution, they are tired, and they are severely tempted to just give up and go back to the familiar, visible, sensory routines of the Jewish temple system.
The sacrifices, the smell of incense, the chanting priests, the golden altars.
And the author's entire argument, stretching over 13 chapters, can be summarized in 2 words. Jesus is better.
He is better than the angels, who are mere messengers. He is better than Moses, who was a servant in God's house, while Jesus is the son who owns the house.
And crucially, he is better than the Aaronic priests.
Because human priests die. They get sick, they age, they pass away, and another flawed human has to take their place.
And furthermore, before a human high priest can offer blood for the sins of the nation, he has to offer blood for his own sins because he's a flawed, sinful human.
But Jesus, because he is the ultimate man without sin, and because he is eternal God who defeated death, brings his own flawless blood into the true heavenly tabernacle.
Not a tent made by human hands, but the actual throne room of God. It is a once-for-all sacrifice.
Let's use an analogy for the difference between the Old Testament system and the work of Jesus in Hebrews.
Okay, I'm ready.
Think about the Old Testament animal sacrifices, like a very strong, heavily perfumed air freshener in a filthy, decaying room.
Oh, gross.
Right. It masks the stench of sin temporarily. You walk in, it smells okay, but the rot is still in the floorboards. You have to keep spraying it year after year, every single day of atonement.
But in Hebrews, Jesus isn't an air freshener.
No, he is a permanent molecular-level air purification system. The text explicitly says his blood doesn't just cover sin, it actually cleanses the conscience from dead works. It removes the rot at the root level.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can feel the desperation and the psychological plea the author of Hebrews is making to these weary Christians.
Don't go back.
Exactly. If you have been completely cleansed at the molecular level, why on earth would you go back to the air freshener? Going back to the shadow, the endless repetition of animal sacrifices, when the substance, Christ himself, has arrived, is a tragic, fatal step backward.
It's a return to anxiety, to performance, to wondering if God is still mad at you. Christ offers something the Levitical system never could, a permanent, once-for-all rest for the soul.
And while Hebrews pulls the curtain back on the heavenly mechanics, the general epistles, James, Peter, John, and Jude, show us how to live out this reality on the bloody, dirt-stained ground of the first century.
James, the half-brother of Jesus, shows us Jesus as the Lord of practical righteousness. He essentially says, if you claim this cosmic king has rewritten your operating system, it has to show up in your hardware.
Faith has to produce works. It has to change how you treat the poor, how you spend your money, and how you control your tongue.
Then you have 1 and 2 Peter. Peter is writing to Christians who are being burned at the stake by Nero, who are losing their businesses and their homes.
And Peter presents Jesus as the chief shepherd, the living stone, and the suffering lamb. Peter leans heavily into Isaiah 53.
He tells these persecuted believers, look at Jesus. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly.
Jesus models exactly how to endure unjust suffering without retaliating.
John, in his 3 epistles, presents Jesus as the Word of life who came in actual physical flesh. He was combating early Gnostic heresies that said flesh was evil and Jesus was just a phantom.
He shows Jesus as our advocate when we inevitably stumble.
And Jude wraps up the epistles by showing Jesus as the preserver, the one who is able to keep believers from stumbling and present them blameless before the presence of his glory with great joy.
Everything we've discussed today, the priest mediating in the courtroom, the lamb suffering on the altar, the king ruling the cosmos, the servant washing the feet of traitors, the man representing a new humanity, and the God holding atoms together, it all builds, accelerates, and compounds until it reaches a shattering cosmic climax in the final book of the Bible.
The book of Revelation, where the unseen spiritual battles, the demonic forces working behind the corrupt political empires of the world, are finally brought into the blinding light.
We have traced the portrait of Jesus from the dusty roads of the Gospels, through the explosive, chaotic growth of the early church in Acts, through the brilliant theological mapping of Paul's letters, and the heavenly realities of Hebrews.
And now we arrive at the consummation of all human history.
The word revelation, or apocalypse in Greek, literally means an unveiling. It's pulling the curtain back to show the true reality of the universe.
In chapter 1, John, exiled on the prison island of Patmos, sees the ultimate man, but he is glorified. He has eyes like blazing fire, feet like burnished bronze, and a voice like the roar of rushing water.
In chapters 2 and 3, we see him functioning actively as the high priest, walking among the 7 golden lampstands which represent the local churches.
He is sanitizing them, auditing them, comforting the persecuted, and giving terrifying warnings to the complacent.
But chapter 5 is where the ultimate paradox of the entire biblical narrative is finally resolved. John is having a vision of the throne room of heaven.
And what does he see?
In the right hand of God is a scroll sealed with 7 seals. This scroll represents the title deed to the earth and the destiny of human history. A mighty angel shouts, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?"
And no one in heaven, on earth, or under the earth is worthy.
John starts weeping bitterly because the universe is stuck. Evil will never be judged, and history have no resolution. But then an elder taps John on the shoulder and says, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll."
The lion, the ultimate symbol of apex power of the conquering king of Matthew's gospel.
Right. So John turns around, expecting to see a roaring, muscular, terrifying lion. And what does he see? He sees a lamb standing as though it had been slain.
It is the defining chromatic image of Christ in the entire Bible. The king is the lamb.
The power of the lion is entirely fundamentally rooted in the sacrifice of the lamb.
And through that sacrifice, Colossians 2 tells us he disarmed the principalities and powers. He stripped the unseen demonic forces of their legal authority to condemn humanity.
In Revelation, we see the final, violent outworking of that legal victory as he rides out to ultimately banish evil, judge the wicked, and throw Satan and death itself into the lake of fire.
He is the husband to the bride, the church, and he will rule as God in the eternal city where there is no more night, no more sea, and no more tears.
But there is a detail in Revelation 5 that stops me in my tracks.
Which one?
When John sees the lamb looking as though it had been slain, it implies he still bears the visible, physical marks of the crucifixion. The gashes in his hands, his feet, his side.
Yes.
Why does Jesus still have his scars in eternity? If he has a glorified, resurrected, perfected body that will never die again, shouldn't those horrific wounds be completely healed and erased?
It's perhaps the most beautiful theological detail in the text. Those scars are not defects in his glorified body. They are not signs of damage that heaven couldn't quite fix.
Then what are they?
They are his eternal medals of honor. They are the permanent physical proof to the entire cosmos that the King of the universe's power is forever defined by his self-giving love.
Oh, wow.
They are the eternal, visible receipt of our redemption. When believers look at him 10,000 years from now, they will see the cost of their presence in heaven written into the very flesh of God.
Medals of honor.
Oh.
And if we look at how this endlessly complex, multifaceted portrait applies to us right now, today, in the middle of our chaotic lives.
It's immensely practical.
The ultimate man understands our human infirmities perfectly when we are tempted or exhausted. The Comforter provides supernatural strength when our jars of clay are cracking.
Following the servant king means we have a mandate to actively subvert our own status-obsessed cultures.
It means we don't climb the corporate or social ladder by stepping on people. We climb down to lift people up.
It means breaking down societal and racial walls like Paul talked about in Ephesians and actively reconciling broken relationships in our families and communities like Philemon.
To follow Jesus is to be called to emulate this incredibly complex reality. Believers today are called to lead by serving, to conquer by enduring suffering with grace,
to subvert worldly power with radical love, and perhaps most importantly, to rest in the absolute confidence that their high priest is perpetually, eternally interceding for them in the courtroom of heaven.
We've covered massive ground today, from the bloody brazen altar of the ancient tabernacle to the empty tomb in Jerusalem, from the blinding light on the Damascus road to the thundering crystal sea throne room of Revelation.
Jesus is the priest who cleanses us, the lamb who bought us, the servant who helps us, the man who understands us, and the God who rules the cosmos.
It is the ultimate story, and every single book of the New Testament is just another angle, another cross-section of that one brilliant, inexhaustible reality.
It really is.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today. Think about the Apostle Peter. This is a man who watched Jesus wash the dirt off his feet, who denied knowing him in his darkest hour, and who later watched him die.
A man who failed but was restored.
Years later, Peter wrote a letter calling Jesus the living stone. And then Peter said that you, the believer listening to this right now, are being built into a spiritual house upon him.
Right.
If the architect of the entire universe willingly took the form of a servant and absorbed the cross to become the permanent, unshakable cornerstone of your life, what does that mean for the building you're constructing with your time, your energy, and your love today? Keep questioning, keep exploring the portrait, and keep diving deep.